Hi guys, my quick review of Orville episode 5. Right, this episode I think I probably enjoyed the least out of all the ones I've seen so far. That said, the standard has been set pretty high with the previous episodes, but this one played a little bit more on the sort of romance and a little bit to do with the whole ex-wife thing and having that, which is something I've already mentioned before, isn't something I'm totally into for this series. But starting off with the sort of the opening part of the episode, which sets this scene sort of sets in motion what I probably enjoy the most about this episode, which is the whole practical joke part. They're watching Seinfeld on the screen, which is quite funny, and then Isaac comments on how he doesn't really understand humour, and so Matilda Malloy refers to practical jokes and how they're humour and how he'll show him how that basically works, and that leads on to some stuff that happens later in the episode, which is pretty amusing, probably the funniest parts of the entire episode, to be honest. So that's pretty good. But whilst that's happening, they also discover there's a meteor heading towards the sun, and on there's actually a ship, and someone's on there that they need to rescue, and it turns out it's Charlize Theron. I think I pronounced that right, I always get it wrong, which again plays on what I mentioned in the previous episode, which, you know, you've got some big time actors in this, so it was a bit of a surprise to see her face pop up there. And they also mention about how it's basically imperative they need to save her because she is so attractive, and they seem to be much more willing to make the effort because she is so attractive. And so they rescue her, Priya, who Charlize Theron's playing, from the ship, and we find out that she's basically got stranded there, running away from some bandits or something along those lines. And this sort of plays into the way I thought this episode would go the second I saw her face appear, which is basically that Grayson would inevitably get suspicious of her and become a bit jealous, or at least it'd be seen to get jealous because the captain will inevitably end up falling for this woman, and Grayson will then not be believed in the way, you know, the classic episode goes, and that's exactly how this episode played out. All that said, there were still parts of this episode to pick up on which were good. As the sort of relationship and stuff develops a little bit and Grayson starts sort of looking into things a bit more, she gets Alara involved. They go and search Priya's quarters and find this weird cube or whatever and take it to the captain, which ends up sort of causing even more divide between them than it did before, because he's just wondering why they're going around in her quarters. And then this emergency starts happening on the ship, and it turns out they're going to some sort of dark matter storm, and this is where the episode gets a bit more interesting in terms of why Priya's here and everything. But what Priya does in this part is basically saves the day, takes control of the ship at the helmsman's position, and saves them from this storm. One of the things to note when this storm was going on, the CGI for it looked really, really good actually. This looked really good. I was impressed with this whole bit, that the whole action scene and everything played out really well, and I liked it. And from this point in the episode, it actually sort of, for me, gets a bit better for two reasons. One, we start to discover a bit more what's going on with Priya and what that's about, which is actually kind of interesting. And two, the whole practical joke thing moves along a fair bit. It's already moved along a bit, which I didn't mention, with Isaac, where he re-enters the bridge, and Malloy's sitting there, a smile on his face because he knows what he's already done. And what he's basically done is put Mr. Potato Head shapes all over Isaac's face. And he looks absolutely ridiculous, but he has no idea that it had happened. That was pretty funny, and plays into where this then leads to, which is the whole point when Isaac's there and Malloy wakes up and comes into the bridge. He comes in hopping because Isaac decided that the practical joke he would do is to cut off Malloy's leg, and I did think that was very funny. Taking it off almost to the entire bit, it was pretty good. And to add to the joke, he thought the most humorous thing he would be to then hide the leg as well, so Malloy doesn't even know where the leg is. He doesn't take that practical joke quite as well as Isaac thought, and he clearly is struggling again with understanding how humanity works, and that whole bit was pretty funny, and plays it again to where we start to discover more about Priya. The chief engineer discovers what is the cube thing in the engine, or in part of the engine, and they sort of go and have a little look at it and realise they can't sort of take it out. And so the captain and Grayson and Alara go and confront Priya in her quarters about what's going on, to where she eventually admits to what's actually going on. And she's actually from the future, I think it's about 400 years from the time they're in now, and she comes back and in essence saves vessels or whatever it might be, artifacts, from being destroyed or killed when they're at their point of disaster. And what was actually supposed to happen, apparently from her timeline perspective, is that in that dark matter storm, the Orville and the crew were supposed to be killed, but she saved them, and therefore she can then take it as sort of haulage back to the future and sell it off to the highest bidder, which then makes her character a little bit more interesting actually. And what she does as a result of that is takes over the ship with this whole cube thing. But while they're having this conversation, which is quite a serious conversation, at one point when it's all quite serious and the captain's talking, the leg just drops out of the ceiling onto the table, Malloy's leg from earlier. The timing of that and stuff was very good, and it also worked quite well when Alara decided to take the leg out and give the captain, not on purpose, but whack the captain with it on the way out. Pretty sort of sort of lame joke in a way, but actually it worked pretty well. The timing again, all of that, the whole thing with the practical joke and the leg worked really, really well. I liked that whole thing with Malloy and Isaac. It was really, really good. Upon discovering the cube, Isaac tries to sort of link up with it and take it off or do whatever, and ends up seemingly dying, or at least getting sort of fried to pieces. Which then later moves on to where we go with the episode. Obviously, we discovered what Priya's doing. She's taken over the ship. Isaac's out of action, and she takes them through this wormhole, which is where she's come from, which is how she basically travels through time. I don't think she's the only person who does this. There's other people as well, I think, potentially, who do this. And we see this massive ship that they're going to take it to. However, what had actually happened with Isaac is he didn't die. He was actually within the system, and he sort of managed to take control back of the ship, and this is how they basically escape, with Priya still on board. This leads on to the sort of more or less final scene with the captain and Priya, where they have this sort of fairly frank conversation. The captain says she didn't really care and stuff like that. She says she did. But what he ends up doing is destroying the wormhole, and apparently from what Isaac said, this would disrupt the timeline so she wouldn't come back and stuff, which I thought kind of maybe implied that he'd never know who she was, but he clearly does, and they're still alive, so she had an impact on their timeline. All of that was maybe a little bit weird. I know they're not trying to be too clever, but I decided not to think too deeply into what was going on with the whole timelines and stuff there, because I'm not sure it quite makes sense. People might correct me on that. So in conclusion, as you can sort of tell, I didn't enjoy this episode quite as much as I've enjoyed the others. It got better as the episode went on. There were some good jokes in it. Like I say, the whole practical joke element throughout the episode was very good. There was also sort of quite a good few little one-liners and stuff. One bit when Priya and the captain were talking, and he told her to go to hell, and she just looked at him sort of confused and sort of, what does that mean? Is that an expression? And he's like, yeah. And she's never heard of it. I goes, well, it's really bad. That bit was pretty funny, and there was quite a few little bits again, as with every episode, which does keep the whole thing moving along quite nicely. One-liner little jokes and stuff like that worked well, as it has done throughout the entire series. So as a final score, I will mark this one down a little bit because I didn't enjoy it as much as I've already said. So I will give episode 5 a 6 out of 10.